What's up, family? Welcome back to Nazrani's in the City. I'm Josh.
And I'm Abhi.
And we're back. And we got a loaded episode for you guys today.
Yeah.
Abhi, how are we feeling, man?
Feeling good. Just a little nervous because of, we're talking about politics. It's all, especially now. It's not.
Yeah. A couple of notes. One is, for all our non-American listeners, we just ask that you bear with us. Because as you know, America is in turbulent times right now. I think that's the second thing.
Probably the world at large. We're speaking from the American perspective.
That's right, and everybody's just kind of looking at us.
Yeah,
my gosh, what is going on here? You know, very, very divisive times. But I think as we're going to talk about, it's more than just divisive.
Yeah.
So the second thing is, for anybody that feels pressured, anybody that feels distraught, I just really want to, we want to pour our hearts to you, know that we're with you, and we had an episode ready to go this weekend, one that we recorded back in SoCal on like a RIM, if you guys remember that, Relationship Identity Mission. But we felt that it'd be good if we pushed that episode to 2 weeks later, and we dropped this episode on politics just because we wanted to do it before the election. We both prayed about it. It was interesting because I started just having like a lot of conversations with friends. Shout outs to Elizabeth and Maria for giving me this idea. Because that's where it first started, where I realized like, dang, like we do need to talk about politics because and maybe that's the first place we can go into, like we do have a role to play in politics as faithful Catholics.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, like your friends Rachel and Maria.
Elizabeth and Maria.
Oh, sorry.
No.
Elizabeth and Maria. There's this like burning desire from a lot of faithful Catholics to just want to know the truth, right? And there's this temptation also of like, and I'll get more into that, this temptation of just wanting to be told what to do by some sort of authority.
Yeah.
But then there's also the opposite temptation of a lot of Catholics and non-Catholics of like, I don't, this is what I feel like I should do, so I'm going to do it. This is what I feel like I should vote for or talk about or debate. That's what I'm going to do. The church, okay, I'll go to church and stuff, but that's a different thing. Right?
Yeah.
When it comes to my real life, when it comes to real people suffering and, people, all these things, that's, what's the point of bringing in the church into that? And it's just because it's a common misconception. And it's kind of embodied in the common saying, right? Like separation of church and state. And it's a good concept when used properly, right? But the problem is that it's been kind of distorted by like sort of, I don't know, I guess popular culture at large. So what I mean by that is the original intent, especially in the American context of separation in church and state, was actually made to protect religion, protect churches from the invasion of the government into what they were doing. So
it's like religious liberty.
Religious liberty. So you can't, if the government came and said you can't worship on Sunday because we have this or whatever, right? That would be a violation of religious liberty. Yeah. That's where separation of church and state comes in. Or these different objects, like making, religious organizations do things that they conscientiously object to. And so those are examples of where separation of church and state was made. That's what it was made for. But what it's often common seen as today is keeping the church out of politics, keeping the church out of the government.
No, number one example, I just want to mention when, I think it was a couple of years ago when somebody from the Senate or something was talking to Judge Amy Barrett, and there's that famous line, right, where it's like, the dogma lives loudly in you.
Yeah.
And like, personally, that's a compliment in my eyes. If somebody said that to me, I'd be like, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm trying.
I'm glad you see that.
but that it's not. It was an accusatory statement.
Exactly.
In that situation, where it's like, you're not allowed to have the dogma live loudly in you.
Yeah. And I just feel like, actually, I just want to stay on that point for a minute. Like the idea that, so I've seen even a lot of Catholics actually defend this accusation by saying like, no, that is a problem. Like, yeah, I'm Catholic too and all that, but a justice can't make decisions, as a Catholic, from their Catholic faith. And I agree. But everybody's faith, everybody's decisions, whether you're a justice, politician, or whatever, let's just stick to the justices. Everybody, and this is something actually Judge, I don't know if she's justice yet, Justice Amy Coney Barrett said was that, look, everybody, every justice has personal bias.
Mm.
Everybody has their own moral beliefs, whether you take hot button issues like abortion, or you take something as simple as a very simple case that comes up. People have their own wounds, history, education, all these different things that form a moral basis for their life.
I just want to point in right here. Pope Benedict said something like, the basis of politics is morality.
Yeah.
So how can your faith not?
Exactly.
If your morals come from your faith or your own beliefs, how can that not play into political?
Exactly. And that it's just not it's not even about whether Catholicism is right or wrong, or whether Catholic social teaching is right or wrong. It's just the mere logical fact that everybody has their own biases. The point of people in office is to make the decision for the common good, wherever that comes from, wherever their formation comes from, right? So that's just something I wanted to hit on. And then back to the separation of church and state thing, what it's often been seen as now is like, let's keep the church out of, politics, right? So, or government in general. And what an example of that would be like if we made a law that if you don't go to church on Sunday, you're going to jail.
Right, like a theocracy.
Exactly,
type deal.
right? So that would be a violation. However, saying like I said, like if there's two common accepted moral values, right? The most obvious being thou shalt not kill. That's a commandment. That's from the Bible, right? Or it's in the Bible, whatever, right? Would any decent person look at that and be like, that's not something we should have a law because it's in the Bible?
Right.
Right? But for some reason, we look at other issues simply because they're in the Bible and we say, oh, no, we can't have that there. And that, it doesn't make much sense because, like, why is it that with killing, right? And the reason is because you can't have policies that are specifically related to, like, I don't know what the exact wording is, but like I said in the example, it can't be like we have to force you to go to church on Sunday.
Yeah.
However, out of natural law, so natural law is this concept that Thomas Aquinas talked about a lot, Aristotle. It's basically this concept that every human being, regardless of if you've received revelation, so that means like if you haven't had the experience of somebody preaching to you, or you haven't read the Bible, you haven't read church teaching, or anything like that, you had no intellectual education, philosophical education, whatever it may be, because there is a natural law, meaning there is something inbuilt into human nature that controls the way we should act.
The law is written on the heart. Yeah.
Written on the heart because there's a certain order in the universe, right? That there are certain things that result in certain consequences. One of the examples that was used was it would be against natural law to fill your car's gasoline tank with rocks. That's just like a very simplistic example of a violation of natural law.
Yeah.
You know that is not the function of the gasoline tank, and the function of the rocks is not to fuel the car.
Right.
So yeah, sure, you can do it. There's nobody's stopping you physically from doing it, and I guess morally nobody's stopping you from doing it. But take that back, take the moral part back, because it is a violation again of natural law in that technical sense. Right? So the reason that's important is because that's where Catholic social teaching comes the most into politics. It is really out of natural law. There are certain things that even if they're in Scripture, you can know them without Scripture. So, thou shalt not kill. There's a certain ordering of the universe to where life is to be respected. I'm a human. I need to live. This is what I need to do to live. Therefore, that person that is also a human being has the same function. Any violation of that function would be against natural law. So that's where you kind of get this idea that, okay, even without Scripture, you can come to this logical conclusion that you shouldn't kill somebody. Does that mean that everyone will get that? No. That's the point. You need to form your conscience and see really study what are these examples where there's a function and then there's a way to achieve that function. And a very simplistic explanation of natural law, but I think super important to understand, because the counter to natural law is what's called positivism, which is basically this idea that the laws that are made or the cultural norms that are set are what legislates morality. So the idea that if a government at a certain time creates a law, that's what is moral. Or not even the government, if a culture just creates this cultural norm, that's what makes it normal, rather than an objectively grounded natural law. Right? So this was really used in the Nuremberg trials after World War II, when they were trying like a lot of the Nazis. The Nazis, a lot of them were, initially just normal, ordinary guys that, were feeding their families, farm workers, mailmen, all of these things. And they got caught into this positivism of the Nazi reign. This idea that killing the Jews was the right thing to do.
Right, because it was so built into
the culture and into the politics and everything, that it was the right thing to do. And so when it came to the trial, and they genuinely believed this, they weren't just using it as an excuse. When it came to the trials, a lot of the Nazis used this, right? They said, like, look, we were only doing what we were told to as soldiers. We were only doing what, our country deemed as legal and all of these things. And what they decided at the Nuremberg trials is that there are some things that no matter what the law says, no matter what the culture says, you cannot do. That was a very significant moment in history, because it was a globally recognized moment that there actually is an objective morality that was violated by the Nazis, right? And I think that that's super important to remember, because nowadays we see it. Maybe we don't. We look at something like the Nazis. They're in the past, and we look at that and we say, yeah, of course that was evil. But you have to step back and ask yourself, why of course?
Right.
Like, why is that so obvious to you? What is the reasoning you use to get there? And if that's the case, if that's objectively wrong, what makes other things not objective? Because you can't have it both ways, right? You can't have it in this morally relativistic thing of like, people to do what they want, whatever makes you happy, whatever creates the best society, and all of these things. And then on the same hand, say there are certain things that can't be violated.
Yeah, and I think like maybe if we take all that and we apply it to our own context, like this is important, because what we're trying to say is that like Catholic social teaching, is the that's where politics should be grounded in.
Yeah.
Right. But it's hard. It's super hard when we look at our bipartisan system, because if you look at the Republican Party, it's not going to fit neatly into Catholic social teaching, or social teaching won't fit neatly into the Republican Party, nor will it fit neatly into the Democrat Party, right? And it puts people in a real twist.
Yeah.
So like how do we? I guess that's the next thing to talk about. Like how do we move forward? Right?
Yeah.
Like how do we think about? Because the other thing we have to talk about is that we do have a place in politics, right? Like knowing that we have the fullness, the basis of morality and Catholic social teaching, we have a duty to apply that to our legislation, to our political structures, right? I always think of the gospel verse, we were called to be in the world but not of the world.
Yeah.
Right? So we have a place in fulfilling our civic duty. But and I think this is something that I want to talk about, where a lot of people don't feel that way, right? Because you can just keep your faith on Sundays, right? Like this is your faith life, right? We compartmentalize our faith, and I think that's what the church and state mindset has become, right? Where you're allowed to have your faith, right? If you put it in this box and you just keep it on Sundays, but the rest of your life, it can't. It's got to be something separate, right? And I even think I was thinking about this, how like what's more dangerous than opposing the faith just wholeheartedly is disarming it, right? At least if people like vehemently like oppose the faith, it's because they recognize, or they somewhat recognize its truth and its power, right? But to disarm the faith is to relativize it. like in the sense that like, yeah, you can practice faith, whatever, as long as it doesn't affect anything else,
Yeah.
right? Like we were talking about that, how like nobody has a problem with the fact that Jesus loves you. Everybody's cool with that, right? Like, yeah, God loves me for sure. But as soon as that means something,
Mm-hmm.
as soon as that, uh, as soon as we derive an objective morality from
Yeah.
that, right? That's when everybody was like, wait, you can't do that,
Yeah.
right? And that's what I want to say. Like, no, like we are allowed to do that, and we have to. We have a place in civic duty.
Yeah, because otherwise it just becomes this, like, we can, even good Catholics from like that perspective of practicing their faith, even outside of Sundays, regular prayer, and all of these things, can compartmentalize,
Yeah.
their faith, right? Of like, they can be very active, pray even 23 hours a day, but if that 1 hour of the day you're not living as a Catholic, the rest is pointless.
Yeah.
I mean, that wouldn't happen. I don't think somebody that actually dedicates that much time to prayer would be like that. But it is a human temptation we can fall into of like, yes, I have my faith, and I'll do my rosary today, I'll do my holy hour, I'll do all of this, and then I'll go talk with my friends about something else. I'll go hang out with my friends and do this thing that's probably not the ideal thing to do as a Catholic, or I'll vote this way, which is probably not the ideal thing to vote as a Catholic. I'll study this because it's not from Catholic teaching, it's from some philosopher or political pundit I like. And I'm not against that, but the idea to separate that, right? That I'm not going to get my information on this from the church. And that's like a really dangerous mindset to take, because like I said, you can't have it both ways.
Yeah.
Either the faith is everything or it's nothing. And
I'm a quote St. John Paul II, whose feast day was yesterday, or
a couple days ago, I think.
Yeah.
2 days ago.
He says, "Faith that does not become culture is not wholly embraced, fully thought, or faithfully lived."
Yeah.
He's calling us out right there, because like
100%.
the faith, it has to be a what did I say? The faith has to be the center of our lives, from which it permeates into all other things, right? And I think I want to do another podcast on this, where it's not just about what you believe, you know, but even like what you believe, it has to be grounded on how you think. There's a way to think as a Catholic, right? And that will for sure
Yeah.
permeate into politics.
Yeah, no, that's a super important thing. Like I even experienced that. We talked a little bit about like my story, reconversion, all these things. Like I noticed that change of like what it means to think as a Catholic. That doesn't mean every thought of mine is Catholic thought or it's right in terms of the church, but like there's a certain grace that comes in, and also a certain like abandonment to your own ideology. Like not these specific ideologies of the world, but everyone through, like I said before, right? Like through their own wounds, experiences, and what they were taught, and all these different things kind of has this formed mindset.
Yeah.
And it's not to completely take that out, because all of that formation is important. But you should be thinking, like you said, right? Like thinking as a Catholic. Even the most basic tasks you do, like washing the dishes or taking your math test, take it as a Catholic.
Yeah.
And I think like that mentality itself is the problem. Like a lack of that mentality is the problem. Because if you step into this boat of trying to match up these parties or match up any political decision or any decision in life based off of some sort of checklist, like does this meet up with a sort of checklist of Catholic standards? And that's solely the way you're making these decisions, you won't be able to understand it. Because there's like certain things that I don't know an example for this right now, but like there's certain things that you actually need to think from that lens of like, why does this make sense from a Catholic lens? Not just this is what the church teaches, therefore I have to do that.
Yeah, it can't be blind obedience. You have to
Yeah.
be rooted in the fundamental principles of Catholic thought.
Yeah. Like you can't just know the principles. You have to know why those principles exist.
Right.
And because otherwise you won't be convinced of them.
Yeah, and the church is super clear on this. The faith will never oppose reason.
Yeah.
Right? Like everything that the faith teaches and preaches is reasonable.
Yeah.
Right? So I think in today's particular context, we have to vote as Catholics, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to say. You can't vote as a Republican or a Democrat and call it a day,
Mhm.
right? And this is a problem that I see where a lot of people feel pressured, um, and how do I say this? Their faith has taken less of a priority, right? And it at some point your faith has to, and this is, I think, what the culture is saying, like your faith has to at some point reach to the point of a political choice or a political party,
Mhm.
right? But the thing is, our Catholic faith, neither party will fit completely into it.
Mhm.
Um, and I think I was doing a huge roundabout to get to this point. So, like, how do we move forward from that?
Yeah, no, just on that same point you were sharing, this is a quote I just saw in like YouTube comments somewhere. Um, so in his book, The Screw Tape Letters, C.S. Lewis, he talks about, so it's basically a conversation with a demon. Is it two demons?
It's two demons.
Yeah,
It's
two,
like one,
yeah,
you know,
like
prime
lead demon. Yeah,
and
yeah.
then like his nephew.
Right. So it's like a satire, basically two demons talking about like what they can do to screw up,
Right.
the church and like, people of God and stuff. So basically, the demon advises his nephew, Wormwood, the other demon, that one strategy of hell is to divide the church into factions. They want to convince Christians that the temporal world is the end and that religion is simply a means. Hell wants us to believe that the proof of the truth of Christianity is how well it supports a political idea, not divine objective revelation. It's worked. We don't base a person's commitment to Christ based on God's grace anymore, but rather who they voted for. Hell is far more accommodating. Pride, hatred, and all in the name of factions are all welcomed. They all burn alike. I was like pretty taken aback by that because I was like, yeah, I mean that's what we started doing, right? Like we were just talking about how there are certain like things you look for in a person. You're like, oh, they're a Trump voter, or like they're a Biden supporter.
we were just talking about how like anybody who has an American flag in front of their house, for some reason we just immediately associate that with being a Trump supporter.
Yeah, and or just like different moral values and different things, and it's like, again, I don't want to get too deep into which party does which and whatever, but like I remember like conversations and somebody would bring up pro-life or like they were literally talking about like abortion in itself, not as a political issue, just the concept of abortion. And then somebody was like, "Oh, you're probably a Trump supporter." And I was just like, if that's the conclusion you're making, I mean, I don't know, doesn't that tell you something? Like, don't you have a problem with that? That if abortion is aligned with a certain party,
Yeah.
like and I feel like that was really sad to see because it's like, why is that? Why are you automatically asserting a negative connotation to something you claim to believe in, right? And I feel like we've fallen into that boat within our church. We don't even need to look at the division in the outside world to do too much analysis on that. Like, look at within our church, right? Oh, you're going to hell if you're voting for Trump. Oh, you're going to hell if you're voting for Biden. These are different things that are like, no, that's not how we go about this.
What's that? What's that St. Thomas More quote that you had? I really like that one.
St. Thomas More. Oh yeah, he said, "I die the king's good servant and God's first." So St. Thomas More, for those of you who don't know, he's a patron saint of politicians. He was a British politician during the time of Henry VIII. People that don't know Henry VIII, he's the one that killed his wives and stuff for the divorce, and he wanted to be the head of the Church of England. And St. Thomas More was like basically one of his like right hand men, the king's right hand man. Very affluent politician, lawyer, and everything. But he vehemently opposed this because he was a faithful Catholic. It's like, no, you can't keep killing and divorcing your wives, and you are not the head of the church, and these different things. And ultimately, he was tried for treason and executed. It's a very simplistic breakdown of his life. I'd recommend the movie A Man for All Seasons if you get a chance. Great movie to watch. Tells you a little bit more about him. But yeah, I mean that's that quote, right? What does it talk about? I'm king's good servants, but God's first. I think that kind of summarizes our duty.
Yeah.
Like our duty to be faithful citizens, active citizens, but that comes out of a service to God. not, we happen to be worshiping God, but we need to serve our country. Like, let me take a break and like serve my country real quick. It's coming out of that service of God that our service of the politic comes in.
Mm.
And I think
St. Thomas More, he was always acting and living out of a place of faith.
Yeah.
Right. Even unto his death.
Yeah. Almost at like the highest office, in England. So that goes to show you that it wasn't something separate.
Yeah.
And this is a saint. So I think you have to understand that this is not something that you can compartmentalize and say like, let me take these two separately.
Right.
Or let me just take values I learned from my faith and apply them. Even that isn't enough. Even that isn't enough to say like, let me take these Catholic moral values I learned and apply them to my faith. That's part of it. But like you said in the beginning, that thinking as a Catholic, right, of like, how can I change my mindset to conform with the will of God?
Yeah.
And that can't just be done by yourself. Like a lot of that comes through prayer, formation, and all these different things. But you have to start somewhere. And I feel like starting at the point of recognizing your own thinking is probably not all that great. I had to come to that point because I would think like,
and I'm trying to come to that point in terms of politics. Yeah.
Yeah, because I would be always thinking like, I get this stuff, like I love history, I love politics and all these things. And so I'd always study it. And like after my conversion, I'd disagree with the church on a lot of things. And I'd look at that and but I, at that point, was convinced of the church. So that was like super hard for me to do, right? But what I realized was it's because I was taking these individual issues outside of the wholeness of what it means to be a Catholic. And you brought this up earlier, right? Like this idea that
the analogy of faith. Yeah.
Yeah, like one aspect of the faith, whether it be morals, dogma, or whatever, cannot be separated from the whole.
Yeah. All the doctrines fit together in a coherent structure.
Yeah. So when it comes to the politics, you can't look at something like abortion without understanding why the church teaches what it does about human life. You can't understand the church's teaching on marriage without understanding the church's teaching on the human person,
right? Human
society, human community. You can't understand marriage without that. It doesn't make any sense without that context, right? And there's so many different issues that you look at, and on its own doesn't make sense. So I just encourage you guys, look. The church has plenty of resources and wisdom on why they teach these things. They don't just arbitrarily come up with these things like, hey, let's just screw around and make gay marriage like, something bad or something like that.
Right.
Let's just screw around and make abortion illegal. Let's make it hard on all these women. It's like, why would people do that, right? That's not what the church is doing. And especially as Catholics, you need to understand that. Because otherwise, what are you doing as a Catholic? Why would you want to be part of some church that just has a bunch of like old guys sitting in high chairs making decisions for us? But that's not what it is.
It's interesting because I was thinking about this one thing where like even to call to reduce I'm going to try to say this right to reduce Catholicism to merely a religion, implying that it's just a belief of faith, isn't enough.
Yeah.
Because Catholicism is more than just a religion, or maybe just the idea of religion. It always plays out in lived experience. Catholicism isn't just something you believe; it's something you live.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the, and like you said earlier, it's all or nothing.
Yeah. And that goes into this common mindset I've seen of like, I believe it in principle, but I don't, think I wouldn't enforce it in law or something like that, or I wouldn't do this legally, or I wouldn't have somebody else do it, right? And we see this with a lot of hot button issues. I feel like one of them is abortion. Right? This idea comes up as even from faithful Catholics that yes, I'm personally against abortion, but I can't enforce that on somebody else, and I can't.
It often comes out of like a real consideration.
Right.
For other people.
These are great people that are genuinely care about these people, and especially these women that are in trouble situations and all of that. No doubt on their intentions. But the problem with that is, again, it's an all or nothing thing, right? You have to have a consistent approach. In fact, like non-Catholic philosopher, right? Kant talks about this, how every maxim has to be able to be applied in all cases. right? So if you make a sort of like moral absolute in your life, and just based on your own principle, forget about church teaching anything, you can't switch that when it comes to another thing just because you have some bias against it.
Right.
So there's this pro-choice philosopher, Michael Sandel, who actually talks about this when it comes to abortion. So again, he's pro-choice. He's not defending the pro-life position. But what he does talk about is empathizing with the relevancy of the pro-life position in when it comes to legality. Right? So one thing he talked about was Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas when they had their debates on the Civil War and slavery. Stephen Douglas basically proposed that, look, yeah, slavery, people don't really like it, it's bad and all of these things. We should leave it up to the states. We should leave it up to individual people to figure out what's best for them. And because that's what America is about, right? This freedom, letting people do what they want, and especially the states, letting the states decide. And Lincoln basically said, yes, you're right. We need to leave things up to the states. This is a free country, all of these things. But there are certain things that no power has control of. And like there are certain things that are morally absolute and we cannot accept, regardless of who votes for it. And I feel like that was, and that was what led to the Civil War, essentially. Like a huge part of what led to the Civil War was Abraham Lincoln taking this stance that slavery is objectively evil and we cannot have it in our country anymore. And I think that people forget that. I think that people forget the moral weight of that decision wasn't simply a matter of is slavery wrong or good. It was a matter of what is the importance of a country establishing that as moral law. Why was that relevant?
Yeah, and like even maybe deeper than that is like, are there whether or not there are some things we can take control of?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like as people.
Exactly. Like if that's something we can just vote on.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, so going back to Michael Sandel, what he was talking about with this, he brought up this example to say, look, I don't believe it. I don't believe in the pro-life position. But it would be ignorant to not understand their passion for this issue. Because if, in fact, the pro-life position is right, that the fetus is, in fact, a human being, a human person, then there cannot be any acceptance for this. Because and that's when he brought up the issue of slavery. Nobody would look at that time and be like, we should have left that up to the states, even though I'm personally against slavery.
Right.
And slavery, as evil as it is, if you accept that abortion is killing, nothing is worse than ending somebody's life. With, especially unjustly, right? And I think and anyone can accept that. That's not a Catholic position. Like I said earlier, right? You take killing, and that's usually the one thing that like you probably shouldn't do that.
Right.
Right? So when you compare these things, again, if you accept that the Catholic position, the pro-life position on abortion is true, that this fetus is a live human person worthy of dignity and respect, look at that from the lens of what decision would you have made during the time of slavery? I'm not talking about comparing abortion and slavery. I'm talking about from the thinking, again, from the thinking standpoint. Is there anything, what would your political thinking be back then? In a situation like that, would you be thinking about various different things? Would you be looking at this? Would you have a problem with single issue voting in that sense? Because I see that a lot, right? And straight up, I'm just going to call it out. Single issue voting is not evil in itself. I've seen a lot of people say that. I don't think it's a great idea. I think you should inform yourself on all these other things too. Of course, I completely agree with that. But the idea that somebody is making a decision based off of a certain aspect or policy is not wrong in itself. In fact, different things have different moral weight.
Yeah, and that's what doesn't make it wrong.
Right.
Right. If it's not wrong to vote on a single issue, if that issue carries more weight a lot more weight than all the other issues.
Exactly.
In fact, all other issues are built upon this one issue.
Exactly. Right. So when it comes to abortion, I think a lot of people are criticized for being single issue voters on that. And again, I want to stress we're not talking about who to vote for or what's the right decision, because you need to form your conscience and do that.
Although we will provide resources for you to, to do that.
Yeah. And but I do have a problem with criticizing single issue voting when it comes to abortion, because abortion is not just one issue among many.
Yeah.
It's not just a matter of like, do we raise the tax to 50% or 20%? Like, that's not what it is. Abortion is the like you said, the basis for literally everything else that comes after life. Like you cannot have any of these other rights, any of these other duties of the government to provide for you, any of these other things that we can disagree on, or even things that are intrinsically wrong. You can't look at that and be like, well, this is just one issue. No, you can't do that, right? Because like I said, I don't think any decent person today would criticize somebody for being a single issue voter on slavery. I don't think so. I think you may slightly be like, yeah, but there was other things too. But let me just ask a hypothetical question. If during the time of slavery, the only thing that Abraham Lincoln was going to do was try and eradicate slavery, and everything else about him was terrible, right? And the other candidate, everything about them was virtuous, and everything about them was going to lead to great things for the country, yet slavery was still a thing. In that case, would you look at that and say you can't single issue vote? I don't, quite frankly, I don't think people would do that. I don't think if you take the issue of slavery and you compare it to a lot of things, you would say that. And again, I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm not saying you have to vote for a pro-life politician, because that's not the Catholic stance either. There are cases where you can vote for pro-choice politicians, and we'll share that all in the resources. Very extreme circumstances, but back to the point, you have to look at it from an honest lens of what do I really believe, and I think that's what it comes down to with the abortion thing. Frankly, I think a lot of people have sort of desensitized themselves.
I was just about to say that, yeah.
To the moral weight of what's happening. Even people that believe that abortion is wrong, right? I'm not even talking about people that are pro-choice. I'm talking about people that, whatever position they're in, do believe that this is a human person, do believe that abortion is wrong. Yet for some reason, it's been desensitized to the point of, like, it's wrong, but subconsciously we're thinking it's not that wrong. It's not as wrong as some of the other issues that are out there.
And I at the same time, I will sympathize with anybody that feels so constrained, right? Because it feels like, I'll be honest here, like it feels like it's either I'm helping the unborn in voting one way, or I'm helping everybody else the other way, right? And let me just say, it sucks that that the two parties can't agree on these fundamental things, that it's so divisive that, like, it's either you help one group.
Yeah, I mean, both parties are trying to make claims to the Jesus. Like they're trying to claim Jesus for themselves, right? And I want to be clear again. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying one party does this, one party does that. That's for you to decide. I'm just saying on the principle of it. I have a like, it irks me to see a criticism of abortion as a very prominent voting issue, because it is. And I think, like I said, if any decent person today were to just put themselves in the shoes of voting during slavery, I don't know if they would have that same mindset. So maybe it does come from, I'm not talking about a deliberate desensitization or people that don't care. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying even for myself, internally, it's hard for me to recognize abortion as evil as me killing you right now, killing a 5-year-old or something. It's hard for me to recognize that in my heart. So and I'm somebody that's very passionate about that. So I could only imagine those that, yes, they believe it, but it's become such a norm that it's almost like there's something happening in the background.
Yeah.
And I think that's something even outside of voting or anything, I'd really encourage yourself like to do some maybe like meditation or something on of like what is abortion like to recognize the grave evil that's occurring. And I think like and this isn't a pro-life pro-choice podcast. I'm not going to go so deep into that. I'm just saying assuming that you're pro-life, assuming you already believe abortion is wrong, ask yourself, do I truly believe the gravity of it in my heart? Because I sometimes don't. That's why I'm saying that. Because like I sometimes I'm like subconsciously thinking it's bad, but it's not like as bad as a lot of things that are going on.
I'll admit to the same thing. Sometimes I get I'm just not so awake to this. You know? But I remember I was doing my own research yesterday, and I saw this quote from Mother Teresa. She said something like, "Anything is permissible if abortion's okay."
Yeah.
And I think that's something for us to really think about. If we have, as human beings, if we have the right, if we claim to have the right to choose whether or not someone can live, then yeah, anything is possible.
Yeah.
Right. Morality will be thrown out the window.
Yeah.
I think we have to offer some concluding thoughts here. Well, one thing I want to say is, how do I say this? One, I'll say for anybody who feels super pressured, that like, because I really do think the culture is doing a really good job of making this election like it's a do or die situation. Like and to some extent, I think that's true. That like this election will determine a crazy future for us.
Yeah.
And I have my own thoughts about that, but I'll keep that to myself. But it's not do or die because of the Catholic doctrine of providence. And I want to point out that a secular culture without God doesn't have the hope of providence, right? And what is providence but the belief and the hope and the fact that God holds all things in his hands, right? So like as far as your own voting situation, our encouragement to you, this whole podcast was just about wanting you to vote from a place of faith, right?
Yeah.
You make your vote, base it on Catholic social teaching, right? Because that has the fullness of it.
Yeah.
But then also believe that no matter what the outcome is, Jesus still has the victory, right? And I also don't want to make it. The other thing is that we've seemed to be kind of reduced to like political animals, like that politics is like the highest priority in our life. It's not. It's not. It's important. We have the civic duty. We talked about that, but like you can do a lot of things outside of politics too.
Absolutely.
And that's
I mean, I think that's where real change happens, right? Like I'm not talking about your vote isn't important. Yes, you should vote. Yes, you should have political discussions as we're trying to do. But at the end of the day, your interactions with your brother, your sister, your friend, the person you find annoying, all of these different things, the person you politically disagree with, how you act with them is far more of a testament of your character than what you put in the ballot.
Yeah.
And I think like, sorry, there's one thing that I kind of wanted to add as a sort of concluding, I guess, is we always try and have our podcast as, in the theme of being life-giving and unitive. And our response and whatever we talk about, we never want to be destructive and divisive, right? And I think that if we just talk about problems, that's all that will be there. And if we just constantly talk about things we disagree on, all of these things, I think that will further lead to that. So one piece of like tangible advice, I guess, I don't know, is even some of these issues, right? Whatever issue you take abortion, preferential option for the poor, welfare, capitalism, socialism, whatever. You take all these like different issues that are coming up nowadays, right? Oftentimes, people agree on the ends. Oftentimes, especially within faithful Catholics, oftentimes we have the same ends. In the sense that we have the same goal, right? Like, let's take something like preferential option for the poor. Most faithful Catholics, I hope all, believe that the poor should be taken care of. Believe that they are worthy of our respect, they are worthy of our care, and they're worthy of our love and commanded by the church, right? Preferential option for the poor. And both Republicans and Democrats agree on this. Good, faithful Democrats and Republicans, right? And I think we forget that sometimes. I think the Republican can look at the Democrat and say, "Whoa, what evil?" Trying to, what's it called? Just kill babies, and they're just all communists and all of these things. And then people that are more Democratic leaning can look at Republicans and be like, "Oh, they hate the poor. All they care about is corporate greed and all of these different things." And that's wrong. It's not just that it's like morally wrong to do so because of the amount of division it causes. It's simply false, right? Like most people, let's just say most Democrats, like they don't want to kill babies, or like especially Catholic Democrats, pro-life Catholic Democrats. They're probably against abortion. They probably have the same goal of not wanting abortion, right? If you look at Republicans, oh, they hate the poor. No, like there's a lot of faithful Republicans that are hyper generous with their money. They just may believe that maybe certain governmental programs aren't the right way to help the poor, right? And again, I'm not here to talk about what's the right economic policy is or anything like that. But what I'm saying is the church hasn't allowed us, encouraged us, and told us that with these issues, we as faithful Catholics can disagree on this stuff. But you first and foremost need to put the dignity of that person you're talking to or seeing on Facebook or getting frustrated with, leaving a comment, an emoji, or whatever. Right. You need to ask yourself, this is a child of God. What and you need to ask yourself, what are their intentions? Don't try and slap your intentions on everything that people say. Like, honestly look for what their intentions are. If they're a Trump supporter, don't automatically assume that they're a bunch of racist white nationalists that want to hurt you or something. If they're a Democrat, don't just assume they're a bunch of baby killing communists. Like, that's both of those are deeply wrong, right? And I think to fall into that trap is exactly what the devil wants. Yeah. Right. There's just, like I said, destruction and division. That's what's happening. And to come back into that, how do we construct? You have civil conversations. You talk with your family, your friends about this stuff in a way that you're trying to listen, right? You're not trying to impose anything. You're trying to see where they're coming from. And then you can come in and say, hey, this is where you're coming from, right? Let me show you how this may actually be something you're interested in. This may be something that may change your mind. This may be something that gives you more insight. Rather than being like, just wrong. This is the right way. Right. And like, I think you go into that becomes more divisive, more destructive.
It's interesting because I think, especially now, we've done a really, like the culture we're in, we do a really bad job of not being able to separate a person's ideas and their person. Yeah. And I want to say that to be truly pro-life, right, to stand up for the dignity of the human person as the church calls us to, it's not only to just stand up for the unborn, but to also extend that to other people. 100%. So your pro-lifeness is demonstrated by seeing Trump or Biden as a person before you look at anything else they do, right? Both of them are children of God, just as we are. Or even that your friend that does not have the same political stance as you, but don't reduce them to just their political stance. Before anything that they do, they're a child of God first.
Yeah. And like I said, like most of the time you probably don't even actually heavily disagree on the ends. Yeah. Most of the time it's just miscommunication of like, how do we get there? Or miscommunication of intentions. I've seen so many times where people like will have an argument and they're like, oh, we want the same thing. And I think there's a lot of people like that, especially in America. There's a lot of Americans that want that. They want the same thing. Same thing for the poor, same thing, for businesses, same thing, especially during COVID. They want healing and all of these different things. Yet we try to kind of make the other the evil one. And I think, like you said, whether it was Trump or Biden, sorry, you're not allowed to hate them. Whether you're Democrat or Republican, you cannot hate Trump. You cannot hate Biden. You have to love them. They're worthy of your love and respect by the nature of being made in God's image. And
you can heavily disagree with them.
yeah,
for sure.
yeah. And yeah, I mean, I guess I hope we've left you with tangible advice, and not just like we talked about, kind of just deconstructing everything.
Yeah.
But like we said, we're this. If you were hoping for more of a guided episode on which principles, which policies and stuff, like we said, we'll be putting a lot of this stuff in the description. So check that out. These people from different resources like Catholic Answers and Bishop Barron will do a far better job than we ever could. So
that's right.
Look at that. Maybe this will give you context for those articles and stuff, and or read the articles and come back, whichever. So yeah, treat people with love. That's all I have.
Yeah,
left to say.
Let the faith do what it needs to do and what it ought to do, as in like it should permeate our whole life. And I guess this will be our closer, because at the end of the day, we got a couple of weeks till the election, I think, or a week, I think. Even at the end of that day, we'll still be able to say, praise be Jesus Christ.
Now, always, forever.
Amen.